Alderman Braithwaite.
Here.
Alderman Nguyen. Alderman Wilson.
Here.
Alderman Holmes. Here. Alderman Tendem. Here. Alderman Grover. Here. Alderman Rainey. Here. Alderman Burris. Here. Alderman Fisk.
Here.
We have a quorum. Welcome to the budget presentation of the Evanston City Council. City Manager, would you like to take it all away?
I look Scotch. Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, good morning. We are here today to discuss the, I didn't turn the lights off, the proposed fiscal year 2012 budget. Mr. Lyons will do the lion's share of the presentation this morning, but I did want to share with you a few thoughts as we start. And I haven't. I'll go through a state of the city as I see it, then Mr. Lyons, who I want to thank for his good work in the last 10 days as interim city manager. Thank you, Marty, for getting the budget done and keeping everything under control in my absence. Marty will come and do an overview of the general fund and other funds. We'll look at the budget discussion schedule and then answer any questions that you have. As we look at the budget for fiscal year 2012, I'd like to talk a little bit in general terms about revenues, expenditures, some specific program issues, and then future opportunities that I think we have as we move forward. This has been a very difficult budget to do. I came to you in March of this year and expressed my concern that clearly we had come to the end of the line where the reduction of additional expenditures and the lack of increase of revenues would get us where we needed to go. And we undertook a several-month-long community process to reach out to the community. Your staff did an excellent job of looking at revenues and expenditures. We came back to you a few weeks ago with the results of the citizen input, and then 2 weeks ago came out with the proposed budget that you see this morning. We're still in difficult places here in the city of Evanston. We have come to that point, that juncture, where I don't believe we have the ability to make additional reductions without raising revenues. And it has been included in this budget are several changes to revenues that I think are necessary for us to move forward to continue to provide the important quality of life services that our residents expect. One of the challenges with that, however, is that it's still very difficult for many of our residents. Evanston is a great place, a great diverse place, and families are all over the places where they are in this economic recovery. And asking our residents to pay more, be it in taxes, fees, charges, is a very difficult thing. However, I think one of the things I learned and heard from community members and have heard from talking to you is that people are in Evanston because of the quality of life services we provide. And we cannot stop providing those services because that's who we are. And if we are not the place that people want to live, work, and shop, then I think that has further deterioration on Evanston as a community. So we are really at this crossroads this year of what is that balance between revenues and expenditures? What is that balance with the services that we provide? I have provided for you in this proposed budget a framework which I think makes sense. The budget has a deficit in it because I think it's my responsibility to provide you options, but ultimately it's the City Council's responsibility to make those decisions for balancing the budget. So on the revenue side, there is increases in property taxes proposed. We have gone 2 consecutive years without increases for the property tax for general purposes, and there is a 3% increase for general purposes in the property tax proposed. We are also proposing additional changes to the property tax, which is consistent over the last several years for our police and fire pensions and our capital debt. We have made great progress in the area of pensions. The state of Illinois has made some changes legislatively which provide some help, but the costs of pensions moving forward remain a challenge for the city of Evanston, and we must fund to the best of our ability these pensions. And so there's a small part of the property tax increase going toward the police and fire pensions. Debt is the third of four components of the adjustment to the property tax. We have worked very hard to look at our capital improvement program to make changes to decrease the amount of debt that we're incurring annually, but needs still remain. And while I think we have a responsible capital improvement budget before you, we still have to pay the debt service for all the projects that have come before. We can do a good job, I think, of slowing down that debt, but the capital needs remain. And one of the things I would like to talk to with the council through this is how much additional money we should put in for capital. I had started this process proposing that we would take $2 million from operating and move it to capital. With the budget that you have, we were not able to do that because I felt the additional reductions on expenditures or the additional raise of fees and charges was not acceptable. So there's about $750,000 included for additional capital spending, but no more. And would ask the council through your deliberations to think about the use of one-time money. There is no one-time money to balance any part of the budget here, and I think that's extremely important. But in these difficult economic times, it may be prudent to spend some one-time money on capital, and would ask the council to consider that as we move forward. The next area of revenues is fees and charges. There are a variety of changes to fees and charges. Staff looked at other communities. We listened carefully through the citizen engagement process, and we tried to select those fees and charges that made sense. Many of you, of course, have been following in the newspapers, our neighbors to the south, and the budget that Mayor Emanuel has proposed, and a great number of changes in fees and charges. There is no magic to what is an appropriate fee or charge for any service that we provide. There is no appropriate magic for fees and charges associated with water and sewer and refuse rates. But I believe we need to look at some changes that are included in the budget. I believe are prudent changes to fees and charges which help our overall revenue picture. The third area of revenue is probably the most important, and that is taking a step back to where we're at with this budget, looking forward over the next several years. What can we do to stop this trend? What can we do to have additional revenue come into the city so we're not looking at raising taxes as much, we're not looking at raising fees and charges as much. We have to invest in economic development activities. We have to invest in the economic engine that makes this community move forward. Unfortunately, upon my arrival in 2009, economic development was really hard, and it continues to be hard. That really was the beginning point, or certainly the first stages of a major national recession. The city of Evanston did not have staff in place to work aggressively in the areas of economic development. Over the last year and a half, we have made some important staff changes to help us be aggressive in the area of economic development. Unfortunately, Madam Mayor, members of the council, I still don't believe we're doing enough. We have really been focused on many projects and initiatives that are extraordinarily important to Evanston, but are projects that have been on the table for a long time. We are still being too reactive in the area of economic development and not being proactive enough. Included in this budget from the Economic Development Fund are 2 additional positions to be funded so that we would have 4 full-time staff members plus an economic development manager in our Community and Economic Development Department to be aggressive on economic development. I believe it is the single most important thing that this city can do moving forward is to not only be reactive, because we have to unfortunately be reactive to when developers come to us with proposals, but we must be proactive. We must be more proactive to bring people here to Evanston who want to start a business. We need to be more proactive to people who are in Evanston who want to expand their business. We need to be a place in the Chicago area where people who are involved in new technologies can come here and be innovative and use the resources of the greater Chicago area, of Northwestern University, of the University of Chicago. Moving forward, it's my number one priority is to continue to be proactive in the area of economic development. I think if we are proactive in the area of economic development, we will have new resources coming in to help fund important quality of life issues. Finally, in the area of revenues are the important parts of non-tax revenues. These are monies that do not come from taxes, monies that don't necessarily come from fees and charges. Looking forward, the number one non-tax revenue that I believe we can now take a very aggressive stance on is in the area of water. We have talked at this council for many years about what we can do to sell more water. And Mr. Stonebeck, our utilities director, and I have spent the better part of 2 years working with our existing partners, the Village of Skokie, the community served by the Northwest Water Commission, Palatine, Buffalo Grove, Wheeling, to encourage them to expand their business. And as many of you, I'm sure, have seen, and coming as no surprise to your staff, that Mayor Emanuel and the City of Chicago plan to not only raise water and sewer rates substantially for their residents, but also plan to raise water rates to their contract customers around Northwest Illinois. We need to take advantage of that, and I believe the groundwork that we have laid these last 2 years will come to fruition not only with the Northwest Water Commission to encourage them to expand their membership to sell more water, but also to other area communities. It's going to be a key area for us to focus on as far as non-tax revenue, and that is additional funds for water that we can sell other communities. The second part of non-tax revenues, I think, are areas that we've worked on and have had some success over the last year, and that is working with our legislative partners in Springfield and in Washington, D.C., as well as our transit partners here in Northern Illinois to bring additional resources for projects here. Through Mayor Tisdale's leadership, through the leadership of the City Council, I think we were much more effective in Springfield and Washington and among the regional transit agencies than we've had, and I think we need to continue that. We need, again, to be innovative, to look and see what the needs of this community are, and to use your political leadership as well as some of the very good staff members that you have to support you to continue to bring resources to Evanston. The eras of pork may be gone in Washington, but the federal government still provides transit funding. The federal government still provides health and urban development monies, and we need to continue to be on the forefront to bring those revenues here. We have to look to economic development. We have to look to raising non-tax revenue as keys to our future in the area, overall areas of revenue. On the expenditure side, as I started this morning, I believe continued reductions will severely impact our quality of life. There are reductions certainly proposed in this budget to balance the general fund. We've also provided for you additional reductions, what we've referred to over the last few years as above the line and below the line. So there are additional reductions proposed below the line to help the council balance, and Mr. Lyons will go through the particulars there. Again, we can't be in a role to cut back on so many things in Evanston that we lose who we are as a community. The sense of place that is Evanston is why people live here. And the challenge before us is, again, balancing those revenues and expenditures, not cutting back so much that we lose what's important about what we are in Evanston. Efficiencies and innovation, I think, are, again, a key part of that. We have done some, I think, in the last couple of years, but it really needs to be an even greater focus for us moving forward. I really feel like I take the blame for not pushing the staff hard enough in these areas. We've been so busy putting out fires and trying to settle things here in the organization, but we have to focus on these efficiencies and innovation. Again, it's a key element in making sure that we keep the quality of life and the quality of place in Evanston such that it is. Finally, the role of the City Council. This council has been very generous in its time looking at goals, looking at priorities. Unfortunately, in the coming year, I'm really going to be leaning on you even further to help provide that guidance, because as we look at revenues and expenditures, we really need to combine those revenues and expenditures with the priorities and goals of the City Council. The goals of the City Council need to be even more closely aligned with objectives to bring forward those goals. And we'll continue to have discussions over the next few weeks with goals for 2012, but I'm hopeful that the Council will take some time at the beginning of 2012, after the holiday season, to talk more about where you see us going and where we need to realign our services. The community is not a stagnant place. The issues we're facing are not stagnant, and I believe we need to be able to be nimble enough to readjust our expenditure in areas where perhaps we have not, and I'll talk about some of those in a few minutes. But the role of the City Council is very important, and I appreciate the time, energy, and effort that this Council has spent over the last several months looking at goals, and would ask you to spend even more time as we move forward. I want to talk a little bit, again, big picture about some key program issues that we're facing as we move forward. And again, Mr. Lyons will deal with some details. There's major changes in this proposed budget on how we engage youth. We do a lot of things for youth. We have a wonderful Parks, Recreation, and Community Services department. The police department has worked hard on youth issues, the health department, the library, but we've not done a good enough job, I don't think, in making sure that from 0 to 25, we're doing what we need to do to work with youth in our community. Mayor Tisdale, through her leadership this year, has focused on that group of youth, high school age and a little bit beyond. And in this budget, we're proposing to create a youth division within the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Community Services that solely would be focusing on youth engagement issues. Joe McCrae has been appointed interim assistant city manager. His primary focus over the next several months will be to help us put these programs in place. But youth engagement is an issue that not only Evanston is facing, but communities around America are facing. It's not the same bats and balls, let's just keep kids off the street with activities. It's much more complex than that. And I believe we in Evanston can be real leaders in this, but it's something we have to spend additional resources on and spend the resources that we have in as smart a way as possible. So I think it's a major issue as we move forward. Second area is in the area of public safety. We are blessed in Evanston to have an outstanding police department and an outstanding fire department. That, unfortunately, is a double-edged sword. Because they are good and because they serve this community so well, we don't spend the kind of time I believe we should talking about the resources that is required to keep this community safe, because it is no small task to do that. It's almost half of the general fund budget is devoted to public safety services, and as we move forward in 2012, we need to continue to look at those services to make sure that we're providing them in the most effective way possible and being smart in all areas to keep Evanston safe. If Evanston is not a safe community from a policing perspective, if it does not have proper fire services, then really everything else falls away from that. All the good economic development work we might want to do, all the work with youth, all these other areas, if Evanston is not only perceived to be safe, but actually safe, if that doesn't happen, then it all falls away. So we don't talk a lot about it because we're fortunate to have such strong departments in this area, but I believe we need to keep it on the table as an important area of focus. Next is the area of citizen engagement, and I think we've done a great job in reorganizing and repositioning ourselves to engage our residents. It's a difficult process. Our residents can choose to be engaged in a whole variety of different ways. They want to get information in a variety of different ways. They want to provide feedback to us in a variety of different ways, and I think we've come up with programs that make sense. 311 has been a big part of that, and I'm personally very pleased at how that has worked out. We have made changes in the budget, and we are proposing a reduction in the budget for 311 because as we've now lived with the service for several months, we believe we can make some service changes, some budget changes, so we can continue to provide a full level of service with 311, but also make some budget adjustments. We're going to be consolidating some of the programs, moving a key staff member from Parks, Recreation, and Community Services to the City Manager's office so that we can have all of our citizen engagement under one roof and really try to do that as efficiently and effectively as possible. The next area is the Evanston Public Library. This council last spoke about the library through last year's budget process, where the council said to the library board, take this dollar amount and make it work. And the Evanston Library Board has done that. Through the course of this past year, they have continued to move in an area where there would be a library fund, that they would have a separate line on the tax levy to fund that, and then ultimately have the library board have control over the Evanston Public Library. The Evanston City Code, however, does not allow for this, and the council has had much discussion on these issues. With this budget, these issues, I think, have come back to the fore and would ask the City Council through your deliberations to provide additional direction on next steps with the library. I think we're in a critical transition period with the library. Mary John's departure, Donna Jezik as the interim director. I think Donna's done a great job of, I think, settling things. We're moving forward with the recruitment for a new library director. But with this budget, there are some key policy issues that I would ask the City Council to consider and provide direction on. Next is the area of the arts. The council has included it in your 2012 goals. It's an area that we've not spent the kind of attention on that we really should. We've talked about facilities, both the Noyes Cultural Arts Center and the Harley Clark Mansion are issues that have been discussed by the council this past year, but there are larger programmatic issues with the arts, which I hope in the coming year we can talk more about. I've met on several occasions with all of the tenants at Noyes and with groups of tenants at Noyes, and I believe they are moving forward with a process that will make sense to allow for not only a cleaner operation of the Noyes Cultural Arts Center, but also have us move forward with significant funding over time for capital improvements, which I think has been the goal all along. The area of the Harley Clark Mansion, the Evanston Arts Center continues to look at options, and my hope is that they'll have some information available for the council and the community over the next several weeks on direction there. But the programmatic issue of the arts, I hope that we can spend time in the coming year looking at what we can do to better embrace all of our arts organizations and really leverage the good work that they do into our overall economic development efforts, because people come to Evanston because of those organizations, and we need to do everything we can to be helpful to them. Next, the area of capital planning. Again, with this budget, we have some money that's been shifted in addition to any capital debt, but we still have issues in capital planning, reinvestment in our streets and our parks and our public facilities. And I would ask the council, when we get to that portion of the budget, to look very carefully there and to think about what additional resources you may wish to put in to the capital budget from reserves or from other sources as we move forward. And then lastly, in the area of debt, we still have a very large amount of capital project debt from previous years, which I believe we are beginning to responsibly deal with, but the debt still remains. The pensions, again, the council has been very straightforward in moving to be aggressive, to do more with pensions, but again, that debt also still remains. So both our capital projects debt and our pension debt loom large for us in the city of Evanston, and the costs associated with them loom large, and the costs associated with them on an ongoing basis really take away from our ability to spend those monies on other things. And I think that's part of the puzzle as well, is because we're not able to spend some of those additional dollars in other areas and instead have to spend them on debt, that makes things even tighter for us. Future opportunities. So as we move forward, we look at this budget with an understanding that over the last 2 years we have made reductions of about $15 million to balance the last 2 budgets. We've eliminated 65 positions in order to balance the last 2 budgets. Where do we go from here? Can we stop this cycle of reductions? I hope so. Can we stop the cycle of significant revenue enhancements? I hope so. But we have to look at some key issues in order to do that. And I think the first one that's most important is in the area of economic development and job creation. As I've said earlier, we need to stop being so reactive in the area of economic development and be as proactive as we possibly can to bring businesses here, to help businesses that are currently here grow, and look in the area of job creation. No one's going to help us with job creation. We're going to have to do this ourselves. There are pots of money out there. There are job training programs out there. But no one's going to come to Evanston and say, Evanston, here's the plan for job creation. It is up to this city council to help provide the leadership in job creation in this community. And I think that if we can come up with strategies not only for youth who are out of work, and there are many youth in Evanston that are out of work from 18 to 25, but what can we do to help others? I think job creation is a key element, and no one's going to do that but us. And so we look to the council for guidance and direction and support as we look at that, and I believe our economic development activities plus job creation really help grow the pie of dollars that will fund other programs here in Evanston. Second, the area of youth engagement. I've already said a lot about it this morning. It's a real critical issue for us. We have component parts that we do very well. We need to stitch them together better, and we need to provide opportunities for youth, some of them disenfranchised youth, to do better with their lives. And I think with this budget, with the changes we're making, with the creation of a youth division, we'll be able to do that. Partnerships. This past year, we added a volunteer coordinator. This past year, we added a development officer. Those two positions are very key positions for us in bringing partners to the table to help us do work. We need to do more in both those areas. I think we need to provide a greater focus in the area of volunteers. We need to provide a greater focus in the area of not only raising money, but being strategic, working with other nonprofits, District 202, District 65, Northwestern, Oakton Community College. What other partnerships can we create to move forward the goals and objectives of the City Council? Again, I think we've begun the work in that area, but lots more focus and attention is really going to be needed on that, I think, to help move us forward. Public safety, we're blessed to have great police and fire departments, but we have to keep our eye on the ball, make sure that they have necessary resources to move forward. And then finally, a focus on priorities. I think this year with the community budget process, doing the priority-based budgeting, we now have, I think, a framework, but that framework is only as good as how we use it as a benchmark to move forward. And again, thank the City Council for its focus on priorities, and we'll tell you today that I'll be leaning on you even more as we move forward in 2012 to help us keep our eye on the ball with your City Council goals and priorities as we move forward. So, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, Mr. Lyons will come up now and talk about the details of the budget. We feel that the budget we have in front of you is an appropriate and responsible budget given very difficult times. I wish we could come up before you and say that there were no cuts needed and then no additional money needed, but that would not be responsible. We've tried to make this budget as real as possible. We've tried to do it in a way that ongoing expenses are supported with ongoing revenues so that we can lay a groundwork to continue to move forward in the future. So unless you have any initial questions, Madam Mayor, I'll turn it over to Mr. Lyons.
I don't believe there are any questions. Oh, there are. Alderman Rainey.
Well, I don't have a question, but I really want to comment on a few things that you said. Number one, there's this attempt, or at least an appearance, that our debt service is evil. The debt service represents our beautiful parks, every single penny spent in improving our infrastructure, our roads, buildings that we maintain. The ones we don't maintain mean we haven't gone out and done improvements on. So it's not a waste of money, and it's painful to maintain the, I don't know what the value of our infrastructure and buildings and parks is, what that value is, but we have to maintain them. And so I think that should be mentioned. You mentioned that we have a wonderful police and fire department. I couldn't agree more. I think our city is safe. However, I can assure you that it is not the perception of all people that all parts of our community are safe. It's just there are members of this council who don't feel that, and there are members of the community, and there are members outside the community that we are trying to attract to our community. So I don't think we should, I can't embrace that comment that you made, that the perception is that our community is safe, because I think it is, but the perception of others is not always that case. I'm interested in knowing, you mentioned that instead of the $2 million you were going to take from the general fund to spend on capital improvements, you've reduced it to $750,000, which I think is extremely wise. But in reading your budget message and otherwise, you mentioned only $500,000. What you said $750 in your presentation just now.
And I'll let Mr. Lyons catch that.
That's
he'll
what I was
cover
wondering.
that.
You're going to handle that. Okay.
Again, we've tried to balance. We wanted to do $2 million, and we came to the prudent realization that we couldn't. I think, Alderman Rainey, your comments on debt are very well taken. I think we have to spend money investing in our infrastructure. The challenge is that money has to ultimately get paid back, and it's a matter of how best to balance current revenues and current expenditure needs with paying back that debt service. It's not evil, it's not bad, but it's just a challenge that is in the mix of a lot of other challenges.
It is a challenge. And not everybody comes to Evanston because it's diverse. A lot of people come because we have beautiful parks, an exquisite lakefront, wonderful streets and parks. And, so we have to maintain those. I mean, they are an economic development tool in attracting others to
And diversity in Evanston is one definition does not apply. Diversity means many, many things, and one of the challenges that this city council has is to be not only mindful of that, but also to fund, as you say, Alderman Rainey, all the various things that might be in one person's mind on what that diversity means in Evanston. For some, it's the socioeconomics. For others, it is the trees and the beaches and the downtown and the university and the arts community. That's the part of that diversity too.
But it's a package.
You bet.
Alderman Grover.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Wally, and thank you, Mr. Lyons, and your team for all the work to put together the budget proposal for this year. And Mr. Bobkowitz, as we kind of discussed, still feels as if we're in triage mode. And you mentioned not wanting to be in a situation where we're looking at significant revenue enhancements, cuts in services, layoffs. And the irony there is we're looking at job creation. At the same time, we're laying people off, and we're not contributing to the employment rate in Evanston ourselves. And I wondered if you had perspective on where you'd like us to be heading. What are our goals in the way of how much debt we're carrying, and what should a community municipality that's not in triage mode look like? What should our budget look like?
Well, I think we need to depend more. We really need to grow the economic pie. So I don't know that there's a particular number or a particular dollar amount to that, but it's to increase economic activity. We need to be able to, have the ability for people to have new jobs. The economy is changing, or it has changed, and it continues to change. And if you look, the history of Evanston largely being corporate headquarters are gone, the manufacturing that's here is gone. So what drives us? We have a university, 2 large hospitals, but we have to bring people here who want to participate in our quality of life, people who want to work here. So we have to bring businesses here, and the focus on creating office space so that people can come here, shop here, live here is really critical. I hope that we are coming to the end of that triage, but part of the triage is recognizing that the Evanston economy is different. And the Evanston economy has changed, and perhaps, hindsight's a wonderful thing. We maybe 10 years ago should have been thinking about this, and in some ways were with the downtown. I mean, had we not been proactive with the TIF projects, we'd be a whole lot worse off than we are. But just as the city was proactive with the downtown TIFs, with the Howard Street TIFs, the various other, the West Side TIF, we need to continue to be proactive. We need to look what is the next steps associated with that. There are a lot of unmet projects. Looking down the dais, Howard Street we continue to work on, Central Street we continue to work on, the West Side we continue to work on. It would have been great if we had gotten a little bit further along in some of those, but we didn't. So we're still having to focus on those projects that were not fulfilled, but we also have to look ahead. And that's why I think resources and economic development are so important, because we, at the same time as we finish the work that was started 10 or 15 years ago, what's the work for the next 10 or 15 years? And right now we're not staffed in order to do that, but we have to be, because unless we are and we can start positioning ourselves for that next 10 or 15-year cycle, we'll get too far behind the curve, and then we have to go back to further expense reductions and further revenue increases. And I don't believe that's the direction the council wants to go.
Alderman Rainey?
There was one other point I was going to make, and Alderman Grover reminded me of it, and that is you mentioned, and you just sort of referred to it, you mentioned that it's up to the city to create jobs, to work at things that will create jobs. It almost sounded like you had another phrase that you didn't mention, and that is, we can't expect the private economy to create any jobs. It's up to us. And I think that's just wrong, that we have to have expectations from our commercial, retail, and manufacturing partners in the city of Evanston, from the universities, et cetera. I don't think it's totally up to the city. I'm not sure it's the proper function of municipal government to go around creating jobs. We're cutting people off. We're eliminating jobs. It might be our responsibility to create the environment so that the private market can create jobs. But all these job training things and youth training and young adult training programs, I'm not real keen on them.
Sure.
But I understand why you feel desperate that we have to.
Well, job creation is a multi-legged stool, and I think that the work that we have been doing and need to do more of on the youth side is a part of it. But we also have to provide leadership to the private sector that wants to come here, because they have choices. In the Chicago area, smart technology people who may have gone to Northwestern University, may have lived in Evanston, they have choices. They can go to Chicago. They can go to other neighboring communities. They can move out of Illinois. We have to be the place they want to come to. And so we have to have responsive staff. We have to have a land use approval process that is reasonable. One of the council's goals for 2012 is to look at the land use approval process. I think if we can tell people who want to do business here, we will embrace you, we will help you do things, we will not be an impediment to you, that's another part of that stool. So all that taken together creates economic activity. And perhaps economic activity is a better term than job creation. It's really the creation of economic activity. And the city of Evanston, if we do not take leadership to bring those businesses here, no one else will. Our business partners in the Chamber of Commerce and downtown Evanston are good supporting players, but the reality is it's the city of Evanston. All of you and your city staff are going to have to be the ones that help connect those dots. And if we connect those dots, I think we'll be successful. If we leave it for others to do, I fear we will not be successful.
All right, now I'm 100% agreement with you, those last comments.
Alderman Holmes?
Actually, Alderman Rainey actually ended up saying what I was hoping someone else would say in terms of the opportunities. We all hear some things different, and what I heard the city manager saying is that the city has a responsibility of creating the opportunities, and we've not done that. And I think that if we are looking at our youth, and why we need to focus on that so much is because not only will they be standing on the corner of Howard and Ridge or Church and Dodge, but they'll be standing at Sherman and Church, or Sherman and Davis. And so we want to make sure that we have opportunities for that. So creating the opportunity of economic development, we need to have places where people want to come. And I think that, I think the Dempster Dodge area is one that we have to concentrate on, Church and Dodge, Central Street, wherever, not just the downtown area. And I think the city manager made that point in terms of that we did start there. And I think in these last few years we've been branching out, looking at other parts of Evanston that need that same kind of help. And if we can continue in that mode, even in these economic times, that we have to do that so that we don't continue to fall behind. So just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you, and I wanted to add, Alderman Rainey, that I agree with you completely. We shouldn't be in the youth job training business. However, Oakton Community College is, and one of the things we're trying to do is to work with Bill Stafford and Oakton and bring some of their employment training to Evanston, because it's very difficult for many of our young people to get to Oakton. You need a car really to get there. So the press is to please get Oakton, and we're already paying for Oakton to come to Evanston.
All right, Madam Mayor, unless there's other questions, Mr. Lyons.
May I set my water here? Good morning, Madam Mayor, members of council, Evanstonians. We have, first of all, as the mayor has pointed out in her gracious thanks, and the council has, also like to thank Lou Gergitz, Brandon Dieter, Wolf Pendinghaus, and other folks that have helped us out tremendously, all the department directors, in preparing the budget. It is a very large effort that we do about 6 months before the start of every year. So, in my part of the presentation, we have both a lot of numbers and we also have a lot of descriptions. For the most part, descriptions of the funds and things of that nature, I'll go through that fairly quickly, and we'll focus on the status of the general fund and the status of the other funds. And the rest of the information is for any reader who's trying to understand what it is our funds are for, how we use them, and then look at the numbers. So, the total proposed budget for 2012, $251 million. That is up quite a bit, all funds. But we've also made some changes since the last time we had a full 12-month budget in 10-11. One of the things we did, we self-insure our health insurance now. And in so doing, that created a new fund and duplicates nearly $13 million in expenses. The expenses are still in each fund, like the general fund, where the person is with their health insurance, but then we send the money to our self-insurance fund and then send it out to the cooperative. So we have several of our new funds also included. NSP2 was not around in 10-11 to the extent, and that's in the millions of dollars. So there, as you go through the budget and you look at our 10-11, we always provide an actual, and then you look at what we're doing in the 2012 year, you'll see that some funds are new and other funds, we're treating them in a different way. So that being said, the general fund revenues, when we talk about our total budget, you see that $85 million, it looks like the general fund has shrunk in comparison to the rest of our operations. It hasn't really, but it has been a lot more stable than our capital expenses, where we have really ramped up on our TIF expenditures for 2012, or at least what we're proposing. So general fund revenues, $85 million, and then doing the steady as she goes model of no changes from last year, $87 million in expenses. And that's how we've prepared our budget the last 3 years, to provide our current services in detail, and then in summary format at the front of the budget to recommend changes to bring the budget back into balance. So this year that produced our $2.4 million deficit, and we have a deficit reduction proposal on page 18. That's the end of it. It starts at page 16 of a little bit higher than that to come up with a balance of $26,000 to be added to the fund balance in the general fund. So graphically, one of the things that we also sometimes don't talk as much about, but to call your attention to our estimate. Last year we were hoping for a slight surplus, and we ended up with a slight deficit based on some end-of-year payments that we had. This year we're also projecting a surplus right about 1%. You know, people have talked with me of saying 900,000 surplus. That seems like a lot. Well, that's only 1% difference between our revenue and expenditure original projections. So that is funds that when we talk about next year's expenses, those funds are going to our bottom line, so they certainly are available for consideration as we go forward in the budget discussion. So one of the biggest issues that we have is, this year, the property tax. And the property tax is shown in many places in the budget, and this is a summary of the many components of the property tax in the budget before we make any adjustments. So what you see is the general fund and IMRF pension fund. That's our operating levy, if you will. It's all within the general fund. Fire pension, police pension, debt service, and we have the library listed there just as our space holder, because we assume if we go down the road of having a library fund, then the adopted budget would show that breakout of their levy. The general fund and IMRF pension amounts would go down a little bit to cover the library levy, so it would be a readjustment on the total. When you look at this levy, right here you're seeing a 4.91% increase. So the increase does not include the budget balancing recommendation of 3%. So that would be $1.23 million approximately. That's a little bit under, as many of you have heard me say before, with a $40 million total levy, every 1% is worth $400,000. So we're a little bit above that easy summary. So with that being said, where are these increases at? The debt service fund, you can see it is increasing by approximately $1.2 million, and the pension funds are increasing by closer to $800,000. And that is, the pension levy is based on our new actuarial study that the council has not seen yet, but we'll see on the 24th or 10th, depending on how 24th or 14th, based on the total budget schedule and if we can have everything ready in a timely manner. So I think that that discussion will show, as Mr. Bobkowitz pointed out, our continued funding of pensions at the levels needed to bring our pension funding back up above 50% and keep right on going. So this pension funding does propose us going from an average of about 41% to closer to, we'll be above 45% in funding level. One of the things also in the debt service fund, one of the increases there is the sewer debt that is going to be covered by general obligation. That was part of our, instead of a sewer rate increase, so part of the increase in the debt service there is for sewer funds that are being paid in effect through property taxes, through the debt service. All righty. As we've talked about, when we started this, it's been more than a year ago. We're on the other end now. We're back to the 12-month. We went into the 10-month, and now we're back looking at the 12-month. As I noted before, we are looking at that $942,000. Some of that can be attributable to our estimates of the 10-month versus, which of our expenses would stay in a 10-month budget. And so we have. We're looking at, for the most part, on the expense side that we think we're going to be able to manage a little bit below budget, a little over 1% below budget on the expense side. So it can be a little bit attributable to the 10-month estimating process. We certainly are not, in years past, you've seen us with a bulleted slide that said wage freeze or expenditure freeze. We're not doing that. So we don't have freezes on anything right now in our operations. This is just managing the directors as they manage through their year. This is what their projection is. So again, we referenced it before. We're at a $2.4 million deficit, and what we're contemplating
Excuse me, Mr. Lyons, Alderman Rainey has a question. Sorry for interrupting.
Marty, I understand what you're saying about some things are attributable to the short budget year, but some things are not. And one thing that is not is the real estate transfer tax. That has nothing, the increase in that amount, the over-budgeted revenue that we've received there has nothing to do with the short budget year. It has to do with things improving and buildings selling, and nothing to do with when that happened.
And yes, real estate transfer tax has been performing well. Other revenues we're not projecting to perform quite as well, and building permits being one of them. So we are seeing some offsets. We're projecting revenues to just be $40,000 above budget. So real estate transfer tax could very easily be several $100,000 above budget. And that, if you're looking for that, starting on approximately page 41, 42, thereabouts, you get into the general fund and all the revenue detail. So again, in trying to, and by the way, as we're going through the slides, if I didn't say it at the start, interruptions during the presentation are welcome, since we are talking about facts and figures, and it may help inform the discussion later when the council takes the floor. So we have 13 eliminations and 2 additions, and I'll go through that in detail in looking at the budget balancing worksheet.
Since you asked for interruptions, Alderman Grover has a question.
Madam Mayor, Mr. Lyons, does staff have a recommendation as to how to address $942,000 surplus from this current budget year? How to apply it?
Right now, we don't have a proposal to take that and use those reserves and apply them to any of the 2012, using the term carry over, carry forward. We will be talking about the overall fund balance that little kick creates, and then whether or not that is something that the council wants to consider, because our overall fund balance will go up based on that, and that is also listed in the budget that we projected to be just north of $15 million at the start of the year. But with a $2.4 million deficit, then it goes back down to $13 million. So if we're using a part of it, then you'll definitely be able to see the interaction of using reserves. Again, we would call that one-time money. So as the manager pointed out, we've really attempted to have no one-time money in the mix when we're trying to balance.
Madam Mayor,
Alderman Rainey.
what are you saying is one-time money?
If you take money from a...
I understand the definition of one-time money. What are you specifically referring to as one-time money?
I'm saying we aren't, so I'm not referring to one-time money.
Okay.
That our balancing worksheet is using recurring revenue sources to balance.
Right, and this I don't see how there can be any argument to this. When you have excess revenue in a recurring revenue item, I don't understand how that could ever be referred to as one-time revenue. I mean, we expect properties to sell over time. Frequently we hear, three $1 million homes sold this year. Well, there's always three $1 million homes selling when things are selling. So I think regular ongoing expenditures and revenues can't be referred to as one time. If we have extraordinary sales, that's what we're always hoping for. We're not looking at that as one time. So, if we were to get a huge grant of, like $10 million or the $18.5 million, yeah, that's one-time revenue. But not ongoing regular activities of the city, I don't think should be referred to as one-time revenue.
Alderman Burris.
Normally, I would agree with that on the transfer tax, but this year, could you talk about the extraordinary sale that happened this year? That's where I think we're.
This year we did have one large sale that was just under $40 million, and that will bring
$55 million.
Well, no, the revised amount that we just saw was $39 million because
that was for a second office building. There was another office building that just sold for $35 million, right?
I thought that was the same building.
No,
Madam Mayor,
but we'll get. I
think we will have a list of your questions, and I think question number one is please provide a list of all of the large transfer tax payment, because there has been the reserve, the apartment complex down the street here on Ridge, and then there's 909 Davis, I think, is the office building. So, so those are the two large. But Alderman Burris, we'd be happy to provide a list of anything. I don't know that there's anything beyond those two, but we'll make sure, and we'll get you the precise numbers.
I was just make sure to say that it skews the numbers, and so I just don't want us to bank, no pun intended, for the following year to say we expect those two big hits in subsequent years.
And unfortunately, the staff in prior years has been awfully generous in that line item, and I think what we've heard from this council is be realistic, as whatever the definition of realistic is from year to year. So, but we'll provide Alderman Burris a list of the question number one of the larger transfer tax payments.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Lyons.
As we noted just in the previous slide, although the type's a little bit small, my apologies. This is a detail of the positions, the department, and whether or not it references whether or not the position is vacant or not. In the cases of the parking supervisor, tech support specialist, management analyst, secretary 2, health program coordinator, MWBE coordinator, program coordinator, community intervention coordinator, and civil engineer, those are reductions in force, layoffs, and in the case of the parks forestry workers 3, that is a part of, those 4 positions are a part of looking at outsourcing of our large diameter tree removal process. So in this case, we're looking at, the way I look at it is we have approximately 33 individuals in our forestry division covering all areas of forestry, and we're looking at a small portion of the group and a specific niche of services to contract out, and it's based on quotes that we've seen that other communities spend, and literally tree counts, and then comparing that to the number of people we would use to actually accomplish that function. So
Alderman Burris has a question, Marty.
And I don't want a specific name, but are any of the positions listed here, are those people eligible for retirement?
no, because in this case, none of them are. In this situation, we would have to go in reverse order of seniority.
Okay.
And that's only in forestry. There are at least one other individual on the list who's eligible, but none of the folks in forestry.
Yeah, no, I meant the overall list, not
The
just
overall
one.
list, there's at least one individual on the overall list that would be eligible for retirement.
And just make the slight distinction of eligible and, that and can draw.
Okay.
So that they have both the number of years and the age to go on pension. As we discussed before, we also had two additions, and that is a management analyst in the Community and Economic Development Department. As a part of our commitment to having an increased outreach in economic development, right now what we're proposing is that this department have some support in covering the increased activity in both code enforcement, planning, and in the economic development area. This is a general fund position. But through the past 2 to 3 years, we've had several reductions in the Community and Economic Development Department, and the department has requested some support in coordinating all activities for the department. So if you were to look at this group in the general fund, their numbers would still be down from previous years. And we do have the documentation that we'll also have online as far as specific duties for the management analyst. The environmental health practitioner, this is also reflective of increased role, especially in the area of nursing home inspections. We are collecting fees for said inspections, and we need the help to keep up with all of those inspections as well as all of our health related activities on the environmental side. Avonda Thomas is also here if you had any specific questions, and Steve Griffin is also here on either of those positions. And these are the slides that I won't plan on reading them off to you, but one of the things that we hope to do this year, I think we really need to do, is address our other funds, especially in the area of TIFs. Not so much in Community Development Block Grant, because they have another committee that really watches over those funds very well. But we do want to go through all of our other funds to make sure we're where we want to be. And again, neighborhood stabilization is very active. The council is very aware of that. So most of the funds in this situation do get a lot of attention. It's as we go through, and I'm having a little hard time here. Am I hitting a button, sir? I don't think I am. So, but the other area that we categorize our debt service, our TIF funds as debt service funds. We also do a lot of activities out of those funds. So I definitely feel that we need to talk about, and many of the aldermen where these TIF districts are located have been very active in the last couple of months, talking with our capital team. So I think we have many ideas included in this budget for what we'll be doing with, here, would you take that one back? With these funds, but we'd also like to have that discussion during the budget process. Capital projects, we have just the two major projects that are funds that aren't covered by any other method. So TIF has its own capital, water, sewer, parking has its own capital, but when we think about general capital needs, that's our capital improvements fund and our special assessments fund. Again, our enterprise funds, I think everyone is familiar with this, water, sewer, parking, but, and also when you look at these, I don't mean to go through, there is some information in this area, again, referencing the sewer fund. We're continuing on with the third leg, so we had anticipated doing a $4 million, $4 million, $5 million, then $4 million bond issue in that order to tide the sewer fund over until the large IEPA loan debt service begins to fall off in 2014. So this year does include the $5 million bond issue in the sewer fund. The water fund does have a deficit proposed, but it is due to capital improvements, and our fund balance, as the note says, we will stay above our minimum in the water fund. The solid waste fund is our new fund, and as we have pointed out in the transmittal letter, last year we started this fund off and made note that it would have a deficit, and it was going to be a $1 million deficit. In stating that it was a deficit, what we're really saying is it wasn't self-sufficient, and we need to discuss what revenue source will be used to make it self-sufficient over the coming years, whether that's a property tax, higher user fees, other taxes. The general fund will still be the source, most likely, for any subsidy, any method to make the solid waste fund whole when the user fees themselves don't cover all costs. Again, there is a short summary in the transmittal memo that points out where we budgeted the $1.0 million deficit. We came in at a $1.45 million deficit, and that is because we did not have the solid waste, the refuse contract, included in the 2011 budget. That was an error in our budget. We have managed to it. That contract had a value in 2011 of $1.2 million. So through reductions in other parts of the budget, we've managed to bring that in where the difference was only about $450,000 to $500,000, and that contract is now included in the 2012 budget as well as included in the 2011 budget, and you can see a fund summary detail in the other funds section of the budget.
Mr. Lyons, I have a question. In terms of our contracts, would it be possible, if it is environmentally considered wise, to charge more for solid waste than for recycling? Could we increase the fees for our garbage cans and leave the fees for the small can the same, and increase them for the larger one?
Yes, that would be possible, and one of our goals in that would be on a sustainability goal that the council has, and being green would be that the larger can has the higher price, actually trying to incent folks to be in the smaller can, and by definition then they would be putting more into the recycling stream. So yes, that's possible.
So I would appreciate seeing some numbers on that.
We will have that ready for the next council meeting.
Thank you. Alderman Grover.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And as part of that, could we have some numbers related to how perhaps the solid waste that we generate for garbage has been affected by change in cart sizes and fees and so forth?
I'm going to need a little bit more definition. What is it?
Suzette's nodding. She understands.
Thank you.
She read my mind.
Okay.
Alderman Wilson.
To make it more of a point-blank question, I'm interested in knowing if we're sending more stuff to the landfill or less. So that's the bottom line.
That's the question.
I understood that question. Alderman Burris.
I know we've discussed this previously about composting, but and if there's a way to do that, which would also reduce what we're putting in the waste stream. I know I compost at home, and we do a lot of recycling and composting, and so what we put in the trash has really been reduced. So I know previously we had a compost area that we then didn't have. So if we could look into that, that would be great. Thanks.
And Madam Mayor, Alderman Burris, Public Works and our Sustainable Programs Coordinator have been working over the last several months on converting the old refuse cans into compost bins, and I think Brandon, we could also just do maybe a brief update. They've been really very popular. We've made those composting cans available, and we can give you some numbers, Alderman Burris and members of the council, just over the last several months, the improvements we've made in the areas of composting.
And just to add on to what the city manager just noted, also the Public Works Director and members of the AFSCME bargaining unit came together and have included in our in our balancing worksheet, ideas to change how we charge for yard waste. And Suzette, is that probably the best way to say it? Basically, we're looking at targeting reductions in a collection of certain types of waste at the times when the volume should be down, and whether and then by extension, will that then drive folks to compost a little bit more? But for the most part, we are going to look at being flexible in when we're going to pick up and how often, to see if we can't encourage composting on site, encourage changes in every type of waste going into the stream, if you will. So as soon as I believe we should have a follow-up memo on that for the council after this meeting, so we can have that. Because the memo is, in fact, done. We can share that with the council.
Alderman Rainey?
Could we have a memo from the legal department regarding whether or not we are required to recycle, or is it an option? It's always my understanding that when we passed recycling, it was required. And so that I just want to have a clarification of that.
And I also think it would be operational, too, that at the landfill transfer station, the amount of recyclable waste in there does have an impact on our fees. But I'll defer to the legal and to Director Robinson when we respond.
I just want to know from the citizen perspective, is it required? That's all.
So just to wrap up with the solid waste fund, in 2008, 2009, we estimate that our subsidy for that operation was just under $3 million. For 2012, we'll be looking at a subsidy of just under $1.8 million. Actually, we're proposing exactly $1.8 million in the budget balancing worksheet. So we have taken steps to make it a more user-based system over the past 5 years. Internal service funds, as I noted before, about the two things that I would like to call the council's attention to is that the equipment replacement fund is a new fund. We really want to get a handle on our rolling stock. We have reduced the rolling stock. At the same time, we've reduced staff. Now that and as we continue to reduce it, our goal is to then properly fund the right level of vehicles. This will split out any funding of vehicles only to replacement of the vehicles. No money in this fund will be used to maintain vehicles. So we will have a fleet maintenance fund and an equipment replacement fund. And in the past, we had started setting aside money for replacement, but it always got commingled with maintenance. And when maintenance costs kept going up, it was gobbling up our equipment replacement fund. So this is really just trying to create that layer that we will then be able to manage our overall replacement of large equipment, small equipment, and especially the mainline vehicles, squads, dump trucks, all of those things, that we'll be able to replace them in a timely manner and not really on an emergency basis because they just broke. So our goal is to get into a good funding cycle. The insurance fund, you might have seen that in the news also. The insurance fund, you might see that or say that it went up by 400%. And if you looked back 4 years, that's what you'd see, $3 million versus $16 million. But that's because we're self-funding the health insurance program. Our liability costs are budgeted at $3.6 million, so liability workers' comp. We do have a major issue, though. We are looking at having future claims of $4 million, and we right now have no reserves in the fund. And so we'll need to address that long term. This budget contemplates enough money in the budget this year to pay for claims this year. We will be talking about pensions separately. Happy to answer any of those questions now or at any time, but we will have a detailed presentation that it will be a joint presentation from both the police, fire, and myself, those two boards, and it will provide, the council requested last year a recommended funding level, and our actuary did not want to do that. This actuary wants to do that. They want to provide a recommended funding level, as well as provide the state minimum and what we did in the past. So that analysis, I hope, will answer many questions regarding our police and fire pension funding. I will not even go into that graph. I'll just tell you that it's out there, and for those who like to those pie charts, just point out that the general fund, as I said before, is 35%. So it's not the largest portion. So how do we balance our budget? The next 3 pages, 3 to 4 slides, are how are we looking at balancing the budget? And this is where I think we would have a lot more council interaction with this, and I would ask the city manager, given the time, do we wish to break at this point and have this more of an interactive, or do you want me to go through this once?
I believe that's up to the council. Would you like us to go through it or line by line?
Then break and then come back.
Then come back? Okay. Madam Mayor, does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Well, perhaps, Marty, we can, pick some highlights, and maybe I'll let you catch your breath, and I'll take a slide, and then you can take a slide, and we'll keep this going. So,
tell me when.
We're starting. We have 2 funds that are longstanding funds that have significant balances in them, and we feel it's appropriate to begin on an ongoing basis to take transfers from them. One is a compensated absences fund that was set up many years ago to help balance out the costs of leave, as well as a IMRF reserve fund, which was meant to balance out changes in IMRF pension costs. We believe that we can take these approximately $250,000 transfers for at least 5 years, and so we're adding that as an ongoing revenue. 3% property tax increase we have discussed. The library budget revenue. The library board has presented a budget which is in excess of what their base budget would be otherwise. That difference is $235,800. So in order for budget balancing, that would be an additional line item. The C-ticket administrative adjudication fee adjustments, this would be to add a charge to our C-tickets for the cost of the administrative adjudication services. That's $23,000. Increase one-day liquor license fees, $2,800. Increased collections of money owed to the city. One of the things we heard loud and clear from residents was, come on, guys, collect the money that people owe you rather than raise our taxes. So we agree with that 100%. And so what we're proposing to do is to bring on a contract employee for at least a 1-year term who would be focused on collecting money owed to the city. And we believe that would bring us revenue of $320,000. This is through administrative adjudication, through planning, through the utilities department, refuse fees. So we'd like to give that a try this year and see how we can move forward with that. The license plate recognition system, there was a presentation that was delayed a few council meetings ago, which is on your agenda Monday evening. We believe that by adding this technology, that will increase fine collection by an additional $100,000 just by the use of that technology. Increase parking fines by $5. Right now, there's a varying scale, but most of our parking tickets are $10. This would be an increase of $5, and that's $530,000. Contract out the crossing guard program. Again, this is something that has been discussed. We looked very carefully at the numbers. There are a couple component parts to this. The first is the contracting out the crossing guards. This $50,000, I believe, is the increase in the collection of parking tickets that would be done by parking enforcement officers. So I think Brandon will just take as a question a memo on the explanation on the crossing guards, and we can come back and explain the component parts here. But there are savings associated with contracting out labor, 40,000 labor and workers' comp savings. There's also increased revenue because currently when there are vacancies or absences with a crossing guard, we use our parking enforcement officers to cover those vacancies. And if they're covering those vacancies, they are not writing parking tickets. So again, this probably deserves a larger discussion, and we'll come back with a more detailed memo and be happy to answer questions at a future meeting. Police and fire fee increases. It's a 10% across the board increase. The majority of that is the false alarm fees that the fire department collects. Recreation program fee adjustments, again, something that we looked at very carefully coming out of the community budget workshop process. This fee adjustment represents a overall percentage, Mr. Lyons, to what percent of coverage through fees versus?
Well, it's actually that, it shouldn't say 10%. That's the, I'm sorry. So on the recreation, we have about 53% coverage rate for the recreation program now, and this might bring it up to about 56% in total. Our current, to try it a different way, our current total collections are about 4.5 million, almost 5 million. So it's 300,000 would be 6% of 5 million.
And so we're not looking at 6% across the board, but this would be an aggregate 6%. And I believe we have detail which we can also make available fee by fee.
We have a specific type by type chain, what the fees would be, and it's about 20 or so different fees, with the goal to be mindful of both youth and senior programs.
Alderman Holmes has a question.
Mr. Lyons, can you remind me of the percentage you said that other communities are recovering about?
Well, we know that in some cases they're as high as 70%, but it's not necessarily an apples to apples in that there may not be the same level of scholarships involved.
I just couldn't remember the number.
Now, one of the things that being said is that long term, depending on how demand reacts to our increases in the fees, a goal of, if we don't have an adverse demand reaction, we would like to try and get up to about 60%, and then that would recognize scholarships, and then I think we'd be in a competitive or at least comparable environment to what other parks and recreation operations charge.
Could you remind me of what you have to do to get a scholarship? What kind of paperwork is involved?
I could not, but Mr. Gaynor is here, and he might be able to, or we can provide it.
Perhaps we can just make that available as an answer to a budget question.
That would be terrific. Thank you.
The revenue from the township that's already budgeted for job training and mentoring, and then the creation of a moving van permit fee. Currently, those fees are made available free of charge.
Alderman Rainey.
Could we have a budget memo on what the amusement tax is and what we can do to raise it?
Certainly, we can do that.
Alderman Grover.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons. Do you have an idea of which of these revenue adjustments either grew from our Engage Evanston process or were already in the minds of our budget staff, and you just got a little support through the community budget process?
I would definitely say that when we're looking at this first page, the fines, that part of it was from Engage. Yeah. And then also the fees part of it for the recreation. And it's not just recreation. It was also other services where we do provide a service on a fee basis. But, for instance, what you don't see up there is a building permit fee increase. And that's based on our goal for development. We're worried that will be counterproductive, that we will raise the fees and limit our development, and then that impacts property value, the property tax, the sales tax. While that was discussed, it didn't make it all the way to here.
So it's fair to say that the Engage Evanston process or community engagement on the budget did produce some things that have been incorporated into the budget.
Definitely.
Meaningful dollar amounts. All right.
Alderman Braithwaite.
think Alderman Nguyen was answering my question. So I just had two quick questions about the first two. Under the citywide proposed, under the adjustments, Marty, the compensated absences, and then a little bit of understanding about the IMRF reserve funds, understanding what's in both and where I can find them in the budget.
And would you like that presently or in a memo format?
You can do it in a memo, is fine.
Will do.
All right, then let's go on to the expenditure reductions. I'll just keep going, Marty, if you don't mind. Citywide salary and benefit adjustments. We are budgeting dollar amounts for citywide salary benefit adjustments for next year. Those have not been negotiated, so it is up to the council ultimately to make a decision as to what those dollars would be. So that is included there. The non-represented employees, the 2% merit and step increase, we're asking the council to include flexibility with that. We would come back to you separately with the plan as to how that would be reinstituted. If you recall, I believe now we're, Marty, in the second fiscal year of not having that those increases for non-represented employees, and there's been adjustments for represented employees as well. We think it will be appropriate to bring back these adjustments, so we're putting aside some money in order to do that, but ultimately the council would be approving that separately. Health insurance restructuring, this is changing employee contributions, dependents, and plan design. Mr. Lyons, perhaps we should do a memorandum on this rather than get into all of the details on that. So, Brandon, let's go ahead and do a memorandum on that. And then finally, the last in the citywide category is the reduction in support for the Evanston Community Media Center. This is cutting their support in half.
Change it to 98. I apologize, that didn't get in there. I know that's
okay,
one
so
of the
it's
things.
98,000 instead of 100,000. But this is basically taking what they're currently receiving and cutting it in half. We would also plan to come back to the council as a separate item to change the agreement with ECMC so that we are paying them for services rendered versus a flat grant. Also, that we would propose to the council to take back control of the PEG, the PEG fee that is currently included on all Comcast and AT&T bills for equipment. Currently, that money goes all to ECMC. The city does not receive a portion of that. We'll be coming back to propose that the city would control that money, and the money would be distributed between the city, the two school districts, and ECMC. So a change in that, but that's not represented in that 100,000. That's just the support from the franchise fee. Administrative services reductions, we're looking to cut the cell phone stipends in half. If you recall, 2 years ago, we got rid of many city-paid cell phones and added a stipend. We're proposing that that would now be cut in half from the current rates. The additions of a collection coordinator position, which we've already discussed, the crossing guard program, which we've already discussed, elimination of a parking supervisor position. While this position is in our parking fund, we felt it was a position that could be reduced. And Marty, that $70,000 savings is a general fund savings or parking fund savings?
That is a general fund savings for the position that will then be moved to the parking fund. The lead supervisor that's still in the department. And just to follow up on that, this is almost the conclusion of our joining of parking and collections that we started in 10-11. We dropped 2 or 3 clerks at that point in time, and we've run the division for a whole year in 11 and felt that this is one area. It's a mid-level manager position that while we would like to have the position, we're also trying to continue on with being as efficient as possible. So this is a part of a follow-up to that 10-11 merging of those two operations when parking used to be on the 3rd floor.
Is there any possibility of hiring these people in other positions that we are filling in the city?
Yes, there is that possibility. As we go through a process, we talk with AFSCME leadership and identify all those positions, and then we also, the personnel rules define how we go about a process, whether or not someone's trained or may acquire the skills to fill a vacant position. So we do have that down in writing as far as how we might help with transition.
And so we are working hard on these 10 positions, which are really only 7, I guess, because there are a couple vacant.
Correct.
The elimination of the tech support specialist one, we continue to look carefully at the staffing of our information technology division. Bruce Sloan, the information technology division manager, has announced his retirement effective in the spring. So we're going to use that transition, I think, as far as more of a more global look at our IT operations, but we feel that given the budget climate and their current operations that one position elimination makes sense with a more careful review of their operations during the course of FY 2012. Transfer 50% of a GIS specialist to the Water Fund. We currently have 2 GIS specialists. One spends a good deal of her time working on water issues, so we're going to just recognize that by making a transfer of 50% of that salary from the Water Fund to the General Fund. A decrease in budget for unemployment insurance. Cheryl Shuku, our Human Resources Manager, has been very good at looking at ways for us to better manage our unemployment insurance based on how we hire people, the classification. We hire lots of students, for example, and if we recognize through the hiring process that they're students, that has some impact on our unemployment insurance, so we feel that we can save $100,000 there. We're looking at adding in $150,000 for information technology infrastructure. Those are PCs and servers.
If I may, that's actually a transfer. In the past, we have always had a funding amount for PCs and infrastructure for our technology in the Capital Improvements Fund. And then we issue a 20-year bond to cover that cost, but these items don't last 20 years. So the goal is to move these items into our operating fund and pay for them out of ongoing revenues rather than issue debt for those expenses.
Next is the area of contractual risk management services. As Marty's kind of alluded to, we're concerned about our insurance fund, and part of that concern comes through health. It comes through workplace safety. The city had a full-time risk manager a number of years ago. That position was eliminated. Some of that role has been picked up by other staff members in the Human Resources Division. We feel that that's not been sufficient to deal with safety issues in the organization, so we are looking at $100,000 to be put aside for contractual risk management services. Our plan would be to come up with a plan and then return to the council after the first of the year, but to make that money available in the budget. Mr. Lyons, why don't you take us home?
So on the next slide, we look at community and economic development. We are looking at the elimination of, I'm sorry, you probably wanted to keep talking. You just wanted me to move the slide, didn't you?
No, keep talking.
So
we're just giving you a little bit of a rest. Your rest's over.
Okay. The MWEBE coordinator position is we are looking at eliminating that position. Duties will be shared in the city manager's office, purchasing office, and economic development. In the persons of the assistant city manager, one of our administrative assistants in the city manager's office, the purchasing manager, and then our economic development team, who you are all aware of. Our goal is to continue on with our efforts for outreach and to bring the program out into the community and not just have it in the regulatory mode of when we do bids, was someone an MWEB compliant bid or not. So we do have plans as to how we will make that transition. There will be a little bit of an educational process, though, as far as coming up to speed with the MWEB components. We also have elimination
I'm sorry, Marty. Alderman Rainey has a question.
I need a budget memo. One of the most innovative MWEBE projects ever proposed in the city of Evanston is the contractor incubator at 1817 Church Street. There's a proposal from a group of minority and Evanston contractors to assume responsibility for that property. We got word of that in their proposal maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and it is out there hanging someplace. As we continue to pay for scaffolding at that location, utilities, et cetera, the time has come when we need a resolution on that matter. And I would like to get that as soon as possible.
Thank you. Alderman Grover.
Thank you. As a follow-up to Alderman Rainey, more information about how the 4 people would be taking on the responsibilities of our MWEBE coordinator and what the plan is for community outreach for that work. Just more detail. Thank you.
Alderman Braithwaite.
I'd like to support Alderman Rainey in the request for the information on 1817 Church Street. I'm excited about that project. I'm curious to see where they are. I'm also a little bit concerned about the face of economic development. I think as a whole, the department is doing a wonderful job. But when I look at the elimination of positions, and I also think about where a majority of the development is going to be done, particularly in the west side of town, I think as a department and a council, we need to pay very close attention to who is the face of the development and who's delivering that development. At the Fifth Ward meeting, it was clear to me and anyone that was there, the emotion that we heard from the west side residents when they feel like they're not part of that process. And I just think as we move forward, we as a council need to be very mindful of that.
Thank you. Alderman Burris.
It's actually an overall question. And I know you've given this before. What's the percentage of this number that's benefits? When you're talking about eliminating a position, so I know that's not just a salary. What's the percentage on the benefits?
It does vary based on the benefit chosen, but I think in this case it's close to 30%. This year we went to specific benefit accounting. So if someone has family medical care, we have that listed as the savings versus single medical care, and so that affects it. So I'd have to just go check it specifically.
No, I actually meant overall, if we could just have a general number on what the benefits percentage is on the salary.
Okay.
Generally, it's 35.
That's what.
Generally, it's 35. We can provide for you. We have worked out for each of the positions that are being proposed to be eliminated. But general,
it was more
35.
of a general, and I know you gave it to us last year. I just couldn't remember. Thank you.
The elimination of the community. I'm sorry. Are there any more lights, Madam Mayor?
No, there are not.
Elimination of community intervention coordinator. The Community and Economic Development Director has reported to the council recently on the transition of this change in service, so I don't think I need to go into any further detail. This is just the elimination of the position from the subsequent budget year. So, and we'd be happy to provide the update, but we're handling it contractually, and we're up for the landlord-tenant portion of it. And again, we'd be happy to send out that same memorandum and include it in the budget files if need be. The addition of the management analyst position, we did discuss that before. Again, Mr. Griffin is here to answer any specific questions, but this is really trying to coordinate all of their activities, and they have been very busy over the last, I would say, year in coordination efforts, whether it be the inspection services or economic development. We feel there's a way to get a little more out of the department without a huge increase in expenses. And if you do look at the program summary for this department, currently we have $3.8 million in revenues against $3.4 million in expenses, specifically associated with community and economic development, and that does not include the CDBG funding of a lot of our inspection services. Moving on, police department. Wide efficiencies. You may recall because we were not looking at position changes or major changes to public safety, it being a high goal of the council, we did ask for police and fire to look at any place in the non-personnel areas where they could save dollars. So in non-personnel, there's 15,000 in minor cuts, and as Mr. Bobquist alluded to earlier, the change in the 311 operations, which is now in police, would yield a $50,000 savings. Fire, they are looking now, when they are fully staffed, they can do a better job on the reduction in hire-back overtime, so that's the commitment from the fire chief to reduce hire-back overtime expenses. but one of the things that we looked at was a 3-year look at their training. And during the very bad year, 10-11, one of the only places to cut was training. And we have a lot of new firefighters coming in, and we're going to need additional training, and that is his highest priority. So we did include that in the budget as something that is very much needed. With we need to have all 100 folks trained, and this only gets them back up to previous year levels. This is not an increase over historical levels in the department.
Marty, why don't you let me try to take the next slide? I want to be mindful of time. The health environmental health practitioner we've covered. Many reductions in Parks, Recreation, and Community Services. We've touched on the unemployment cost reductions. Again, we think we have ways to be smarter on dealing with our seasonal employees there. Elimination of a vacant Parks, Recreation 2 position. We've talked a little bit about the forestry positions. It would be 4 Parks Forestry Worker 3s, as well as the Secretary 2 position in the department. We have backup information, Mr. Lyons, which we can provide the council dealing with the details of this. So why don't we just go ahead, Brandon, and add that as a budget memo. We also are looking at making significant changes in how we deal with youth. We are going to have a youth division that will be led by a youth coordinator. We'll be recruiting for a new youth coordinator. The incumbent has been reclassified and reassigned to be the assistant youth coordinator. So we will have a youth coordinator, 2 assistant youth coordinators, and we'll be transferring the 2 part-time outreach specialists that are currently in the police department to also work in the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Community Services. There is $50,000 of job training mentoring program funding from the township, which has continued over time. We are asking to add $50,000 for additional safe summer programs. At the mayor's encouragement and the council's support, we were very creative, and my hat's off to Mr. Gaynor and Mr. Dornicker, who are here, and their staffs for being very creative this summer. We believe that $50,000 in the budget will allow us to do that full-time as we move forward. The reduction in hours for a facility supervisor at Noise, that's a small reduction of part-time hours. The inclusion specialist reclassed to full-time. If you recall from our ADA discussions last year, we have several employees that do ADA work. We have a 70% employee, Mr. Gaynor, is that correct? A 70% employee who's an inclusion specialist. We'll be able to, we're proposing to raise her up to full-time with a $30,000 differential there. The individual does a variety of work in this area. She also has clinical training. By being a full-time employee will allow us to bring on additional Parks and Rec interns to help with inclusion work.
Alderman Rainey?
What does inclusion specialist mean? What's an inclusion specialist?
We are responsible under various state and federal laws to make sure that all of our recreation programs are accessible. And so this position has been with us for a number of years and deals really one-on-one with families to make our programs accessible.
But didn't we eliminate that position in the last budget?
No. We had 3 different positions working on ADA. We now just have 2 positions working on ADA. So the individual in Parks and Recreation, similar job titles, has been 70%. We're proposing that it would go to 100%. To continue doing that work and expand some of our work using clinical interns who specialize in these areas within recreation inclusion, as well as do other ADA work for us.
We have a budget memo on the actual activities of those youth people that are being transferred from police to rec?
Certainly.
I saw them once on the south end of
town. The forestry program modifications we've discussed. I think I may have missed, as we were at the beginning, the 4th line there under Parks and Recreation, the reclassification of a health program coordinator to assistant youth coordinator. That's another piece of the youth adjustments. And then finally, an elimination of a management analyst position. This management analyst has been primarily doing grant work. We'll be shifting that work to other existing staff in the city manager's office.
Alderman Wilson?
And could we get, I guess, the backup for the $243,000 estimate on the contract services, as well as a detailed or some sort of information on the year-round responsibilities and duties of the 4 eliminated positions?
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
All right, then that takes us to the library, which we've already have discussed and we'll come back to at a future meeting. Public Works, really want to commend the work that Suzette Robinson and members of her team have done looking at savings. The street sweeping staffing changes all came from a employee-driven process to look at how to save money and to do work better. That's a $30,000 adjustment there. The elimination of a civil engineer too, as we have adjusted some of our work on our capital program. This is a position that was eyed last year for reduction and is being offered again this year. The $1.8 million solid waste fund transfer we have discussed. Reduction of workers' comp and liability costs. Again, I think as we try to work smarter, we've identified some savings there in Public Works through the adjustments we've made in refuse collection. The transfer to the capital projects fund and fleet maintenance activities. Alderman Rainey, you asked where the $750,000 was. That here's where that is. So $500,000 of ongoing money to the capital projects fund, and then $250,000 for fleet maintenance. We have not done a good job of segregating money that we are collecting for fleet replacement versus money we collect for fleet maintenance. We think that this year is a first step in that direction, and so this $750,000 is that I referred to earlier in the discussion. And so that takes us through the Public Works. This is a summary of what you've seen and what you've heard. Again, I want to thank Mr. Lyons and the members of our finance staff, Lou Gertis, Brandon Dieter, Wolf, is it Pendergrass?
Pendinghouse.
Pendinghouse, okay. Done excellent work. Difficult having a vacancy in the CFO position with Mrs. Earle's departure, but appreciate the good work that they've all done. If we can just move to the calendar. Today is really meant to be an opportunity to give you a broad overview of where we're at. We will come back together again in 2 weeks on the 29th of October. There will be opportunities for public comment, and as the council looked last year at your budget schedule, you wanted to keep this as sort of the overview meeting and the question meeting, and then to have public comment at all the other discussions. So that will begin in 2 weeks on the 29th, and then we'll continue through the month of November, and would hope that you will adopt the budget on Monday, November the 28th, which is the Monday after Thanksgiving. The way the calendar works this year, there is no meeting the week of Thanksgiving, no regular meeting the week of Thanksgiving. And then with the new budget calendar, you'll be able also to consider property tax levy adoptions for then the full 12 months of the fiscal year, which will start January 1st. We appreciate your willingness to come in on a Saturday and hear the long version of this. Again, we believe that this budget is responsible and appropriate as we move forward. We still have lots of work to do to continue to maintain and enhance the quality of life within the city of Evanston, but we believe, given the circumstances facing us, that the budget before you is appropriate, and we look forward to talking to you more as the morning continues, as also over the next several weeks.
Alderman Wilson.
Another question for information. I'd be interested in seeing what the revenue opportunities would be for increasing the meter rates downtown as opposed to increasing the fine amounts.
All right.
Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break.
Thank you, Liz. No problem. You were going to have people just fail.
The two funds that we're sort of extracting from the transfer from compensated.
Could you tell us what page you're on, Mark?
Page 11, or page 11 of the hard copy, 22 of the presentation.
Thank you.
The transfer from compensated absences and the transfer from IMRF reserve. I know that Alderman Braithwaite asked for more information on this in the form of a memo. I'm just wondering what are the risks of drawing on these funds? And I know they were put aside better during less rainy times, I suppose. They were put aside when things were a little better.
And we will do a more complete memo, but let me just spend a minute talking about these funds. These funds were set up in prior years. I don't know that we have a specific date, but in excess of 10 years ago for each fund as a way to smooth, and in the case of the IMRF fund, to smooth changes in rates. So, for example, if rates were to spike in any particular given year, the city was putting money aside so that rather than having to raise the budget or raise taxes because of that spike, you could go to sort of a reserve fund in order to smooth that out. The city stopped paying into that fund probably in excess of 5 years ago, and that fund balance has stayed. So there was no money going in, no money coming out. And so as we've looked at the city's accounts, we basically have been doing the smoothing on our own anyway. So we have this pool of money there, and so we feel that since the rates, it doesn't really make sense for us to have that kind of smoothing fund any longer. The money is still there, however, and if we can draw on it in approximately $250,000 increments over the next several years, we're looking at that as being an ongoing revenue until that money is done. On the compensated absences side, again, in excess of 10 years ago, the city would put money aside for all compensated absences. So the idea is that you have so many employees by the number of vacation days, holidays they would have, there would be a transfer to a compensated absences fund to cover the cost of those absences so that as they're drawn upon, you would charge that fund versus charging the general fund. The practice of doing that ended at some time in the past. We were not putting money into that fund. We were not drawing on that fund. So there was a fund balance that remained. And since we no longer budget that way, and quite honestly, to change to go back to that model would probably cost us millions of dollars a year, maybe even tens of millions of dollars a year. We are not recommending to do that, so we have that corpus of money available. We believe in at $250,000 increments you could draw on it for in excess of 5 years, so we're proposing that as ongoing revenue.
Alderman Fisk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. City Manager, could you explain a little bit more to me about, it was on page 12 of Marty's presentation, the decreased budget for unemployment insurance of $100,000. You mentioned something about temporary employees. Could you just explain that a little bit further?
We'll do a memorandum on that to give a more complete explanation. But Cheryl Shuku, our HR manager, has been looking at the requirements that we have for workers' comp and unemployment insurance for part-time employees. And if we are able to classify them more appropriately, for example, there are laws that deal with students with workers' comp and unemployment insurance that are different. So if we have an individual who comes work for us as a lifeguard or helps us with a summer camp who is able to certify that they are a full-time student, that this is a summer job, then we're able to deal with those benefit costs differently. I think that's the simplest way I can do that off the top of my head. We'll come back to you with a memorandum. But again, it was through Ms. Shuku's good work, looking at our costs, looking at the type of employees that were incurring some of these costs, making some changes in how we hire. Some of them just paperwork changes will save us some money. So we'll do a memo with a more complete explanation, and Mr. Lyons can elaborate just a little bit.
And not just an elaboration, also one of the parts of this reduction is the major impact of workers' comp came from our 10-11 layoffs of more than 40 full-time equivalents. So they're getting to the end of that benefit period. We're at 2 years. So some of those actual, they're all legitimate, but full-time unemployment costs will start to fall off the table as we get into more of a routine of just having less individuals on our unemployed record.
Thank you. Alderman Nguyen.
Yes, I want to go back just a little bit to the IMRF fund transfer and also the compensated absences. I don't want to call these one-time transfer, one-time revenue sources, but they're five-time revenue sources. So after 5 years, that money won't be there, correct?
Yes.
So it's an ongoing revenue, but only for 5 years. So then what happens to the hole that then will appear in the budget 5 years from now? Are we hoping that things will just be better? But
go ahead.
To some extent, yes, because when these were set up, we also had in our bargaining contracts much higher leave banks. And so as we have continually renegotiated contracts each year, we have held the line on the leave banks. And also a generational thing that both chiefs are relating to us is that there is less accumulation on the part of our 0 to 10-year employees in those leave banks. That means that in the current year budgets, for instance, we have in excess of $600,000 listed for payouts. That money 5 years from now should start to go down as senior employees that were leaving with 1,000 hours in their leave bank no longer have that option. They're capped at 500 hours. So those amounts will go down, and as they go down, there would be less of a need for this transfer because it's partially covering those leave banks as we pay them out.
But let me, maybe I'm not understanding this completely. So I understand that this fund was set up precisely so that we could have a reserve so that if, for instance, we had 3 people leave in a year with, 2,000 hours of uncompensated absences, we had the fund. So, but if, obviously now we have younger people who decide to take vacations, over time, but what we've done is we're adding this into our budget. So we have now putting this into our budget, and we're also putting the IMRF reserves into our budget for $500,000 for the next 5 years. So then in year 6, we won't be putting that $500,000 into our budget. So what happens to the whole?
And the answer is you're absolutely correct. So this is a 5-time, not a forever. And we've made the judgment, and our recommendation to the council is that given our horizons, 5 years is long. So we feel comfortable with that. I think the point Marty's trying to make is that an associated expense that's currently in our operating budget continues to decrease.
Oh,
so,
well, that was,
I think if the council would like, we can stipulate a direct correlation so that as those expenditures go down on the annual basis, that the revenue that's being freed up can then replace what was coming out of this compensated absences fund. So his explanation was trying to show that there would be a counterbalancing.
No, and I understand that, but so that's
Holmes, could she just?
I just want Alderman Nguyen, but did we not make a policy a few years? I can't remember if it was this council or the council before, in terms of limiting the number of unpaid leave days that could be compensated for, which certainly should then bring this down, which would accommodate for some of that. Because people used to could just
I know
pile them
that.
up forever, but we made a policy that couldn't happen anymore.
You're all right.
And thanks. But I agree. But Alderman Holmes, my point though is, obviously we have this money here, but it's as if we're sort of picking it up off the street and putting it into our budget. And so then I don't want to, it's sort of like a one-time revenue, but for 5 years in a row. And I just wanted to ask about what's the long-term plan for when we no longer find it on the street, kind of. Mm-hmm. But I agree that we did make that policy.
Which makes this possible now. Because if
we don't need the reserve anymore, and I completely understand that. But my point, though, is that and I think that was a really important thing to do. But my point is that we will be budgeting now with this extra $500,000 put into place. But I have one other question, though. So are we actually not entirely depending on this reserve to pay out for these uncompensated absences? Are we actually paying out from something else besides this?
That is correct. We, for the most part, in the past 3 years, as the manager noted, the payouts have come straight from general fund revenues, property taxes, sales taxes.
Then I understand even more, and I'm happier for that.
And the system was frankly broke. I mean, I think that there was an idea that we were putting this money aside so that when these payouts came, there was money to do that. But for reasons I'm not familiar with, that stopped happening.
Oh, all right.
So we have been paying, and that has been a huge issue for us, basically coming out of our height. It's been coming out of general fund balance.
Okay.
We've fixed other parts of this. Again, I think you're all right on this. It's just a matter of, it's a 5-time revenue, not a forever revenue. Our sense was 5 times is a lot of times.
That's fine.
Alderman Wilson.
One thing I was interested in seeing is with regard to the debt service fund, I guess is a better historical picture and a little bit of projection as far as what's still outstanding, when things are going to be off the books. And if we could also get principal and interest totals, so I don't have to go through all of these charts and add it all up. But if, for example, how much is left on the 2002, 2003, when those will be retired, and to get a better sense of when we're going to have the ability to do some debt reduction, et cetera. Do you understand the question?
Yes, I do.
Thanks.
Actually, I have that, and we'll have it by the next meeting.
Great. Thank you.
Alderman Holmes.
I noticed in the presentation, the fire department is the only one who put money back in for training. And I'm wondering, does that not really affect all of our departments, especially where insurance is concerned? And I'm thinking ahead, thinking that that's probably why you want to have a risk manager, so that we can begin to look at that, because I think that that would certainly reduce costs for us later in terms of injuries and that kind of thing. So can we have some more of your thinking in terms of where you're going with that? I hope you understand what I mean.
Absolutely. And we, there are component parts to this. There is the need to better coordinate our efforts in these areas, and then there are the efforts themselves.
Right.
And so we're not entirely sure what the cost will be. We don't believe a full-time staff person to coordinate the efforts makes sense, but we would like some help to sort out what those efforts should be and the costs associated with them. I think it's important to talk a little bit more about the fire training issue. There's pre-employment fire training and post-employment.
And I know. I wasn't trying to compare the training.
Okay, and I think that's the reason you're seeing it with fires, because there's the real need. We can't put the firefighter, at the station without that training. But training is a huge issue for us. We have not invested in our employees in a way we should. Workplace safety is first.
Absolutely.
But after workplace safety, there are, all of the other management supervisory training, there's the individual professional training, planners, engineers, police, fire, all the other municipal services we provide. And we've not had that. And I think we want to try to get through this budget, get a sense of where the council is with the adopted budget, and then probably come back to you in 2012 and talk some more, maybe some one-time money to help that cause as we move forward. Mr. Lyons, you have something to add?
Just that of the $100,000 in that first go-around, the first part will be an assessment. Where are we deficient? What can we do? And part of that money can also then be for that firm who does it, whoever that firm is, does it for corporations and municipalities to do the training as well. Because that separated training, if you will, it really keeps our staff out of it. If you're, when that firm is being the heavy, that you have to come in and change your processes, it's not an interdepartmental discussion about which way is better. No, it's an outside firm saying, you need to go to this best practice. And we think that will be a really good use of the contractual element. So it'll be both. There should be some training, if not this year, in future years, in that $100,000.
Alderman Grover.
Thank you. Similar to Alderman Wynn's question about the IMRF reserve transfers and compensated absences and where those cost savings find their way into future budgets, I had the same question about within Public Works, the reduction to workers' comp and liability costs. Wouldn't that be closer to a one-time cost savings as opposed to, because next year we will be at a certain level of workers' comp payments and liability costs and.
Actually, that refers to the removal of, the removal of the solid waste component. So the total public works budget for this line item was $617,000 in years past. So we're looking at lowering $100,000, and then, as I think I may have noted to a couple of aldermen, we're still paying some 2009 and 2010 claims as they work through the system. So we're not taking all the savings right up front. This is recognition of the fact that the solid waste really isn't going to be in the general fund anymore. So we're looking at trying to pare down a little bit of the streets workers' compensation costs.
Alderman Fisk.
Thank you. I'd like to look at a couple of things. Increasing the parking meter rates to 9 p.m. in areas outside of the downtown. But I'd also like the Economic Development Department to weigh in on the possible impact of Alderman Wilson's suggestion that we look at raising the parking meter fees. I'd like to know the potential impact on downtown businesses, and also the tying in that with the increase in ticket fines, overtime parking fines. I'd also like a little bit more information in the budget memo on the forestry workers and a complete explanation of where that's coming from and what that's going to accomplish for us. I heard what you said tonight, or this morning, but I'm not sure that I agree with that. Then my last question is, we don't have a zoning administrator, and we haven't had a zoning administrator for what?
Mr. Marino serves that role.
I'm sorry?
Dennis Marino?
Is serving the role of zoning administrator. Okay, is that his job title?
He is Division Manager for Planning and Zoning.
Okay, because in our zoning ordinance, we refer to specific duties and legal obligations of a zoning administrator.
And he has all of those.
Okay, all right. Just want to make sure.
Thank you. Seeing no more lights, does anyone? Alderman Rainey.
At what point will we be moving things from above the line to below the line and below the line to above the line? Will that be at some other meeting?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, your practice last year was you opened the public hearing at the next meeting, and then once that was started, that's been the process. So the first meeting was just for presentation and questions.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Alderman Burris.
On the dependent audit, how much will that cost us? Are we doing that in-house?
I'm sorry. I think so.
We can provide as a follow-up the actual quotation that we had. It is being done independently. Okay. A few years ago, we did it in-house, but this is a firm that specializes in going out and doing that, and they go out and kick the tires and find all this independent of staff, so it doesn't enter into any relationship issue. This is just an audit.
No, I actually just went through it, so I was just wondering if we were going outside. And it was very efficient.
Mr. Lyons, I know you're going to be discussing pensions later, but I did have one question. How much money did all that lobbying save us in terms of reducing the amount of pension had to be funded from 100% to 90%? And that's the main thing, as far as I know, that helped us for this budget.
I don't know that specific carve-out, so I can get that answer at the next meeting.
Thank you. As the city manager wants us to prioritize, is that part of what you want us to do for this budget, is to give you our top 4 priorities, which I've carefully not done?
Yes, you have carefully not done it. Thank you to the rest of the council who has.
Wait a minute. It's not everybody except me.
I've carefully not done it as well.
Thank you, Alderman Wilson. I appreciate that.
It'll be on the agenda on the 24th
But yes, that's part of it, is the council's expressed a desire to narrow the 13 down to 4 sort of top priorities, and we'll come back with the survey on the 24th.
And so we will have a discussion. Well, one reason I haven't put police and fire pension on my top 4, aside from the fact that I haven't done it at all, is that it seemed to me that the Northwest Municipal Conference and I would be lobbying, and that if we had it as a top 4, it wouldn't really change anything that we do.
And that's up to some things are, I think one of the desires of the council with the 4 was to really focus on things that would have the work. It doesn't take away from the importance of police and fire pension, but it shifts the focus of staff time and council discussion time.
Yeah, I mean, I think even if it was our focus, we would do exactly the same thing that we're going to do this year anyway. All right. Alderman Burris?
Actually, I have 2 questions. The first is on the below-the-line cuts about the additional 3 holiday furlough days. Just want to get feedback, and then you don't have to do it right now, but about how staff is feeling about that, what the kind of feedback you're getting.
Not happy.
Okay. And then the second is the 30% number for benefits that we're on salary. Can we get an estimate of what other municipalities, what that percentage for benefits are, as well as the general marketplace for, let's say, companies as well as not-for-profits? That 30% seems really high to me.
Sure.
And I know we're trying to reduce that, but how can we get that down? At least from my years of experience, it was more like 23 to 24 in places that I have worked.
Certainly, but I believe we did some work last year as part of the budget process, so we'll dig that up, and we'll also check in with our neighbors.
And actually, staff just participated in a webinar earlier this week where other communities are looking at the same types of disclosures on websites. That we currently have our salary, but the Hoffman Estates is one that has everything on their website. Salary, benefits, everything. And so from that, we were getting some of their information. So we'll definitely be able to grab Hoffman Estates, which has a full-service police fire. They're about 60,000 population. So we can get comparables.
Yeah, and Alderman Rainey suggested, we probably should break out the police and fire pension piece, because that raises it. So how?
Well, and pensions all around. So we'll delineate, because there's the IMRF pension costs.
Great, thank you.
All right, now seeing no further lights, does anyone have anything more you'd like to ask? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Sorry, Elaine. You get